Sveiki. Antrųjų karo metinių išvakarėse šiandien kalbame su ypatingu svečiu, buvusiu JAV pajėgų Europoje vadu, atsargos generolu Benu Hodgesu. General Hodges, it's a great pleasure to speak with you again.
Thank you for the privilege.
So I would like to start with the situation on the front line, and Russia recently captured Avdijivka, probably the biggest gain for Russians in 9 months. We are hearing that Russia is also pressing on offensive in other directions, from Zaporizhia in the south to Kharkiv, Luhansk regions in the northeast. Would it be fair to say that, Russian offensive is now gaining the momentum?
I would put it differently. Yes, it's a difficult situation right now for Ukrainian forces. They've suffered a lot of casualties. Support from the West, particularly from my country, the U.S., is questioned now. This is a difficult situation. But let's put it in context. We're at 10 years of war now. Russia had invaded 10 years ago, and they illegally annexed Crimea. They were fighting and took territory in the Donbass. After 10 years of war, with every advantage, this is all they have. That's less than 20% of Ukraine. After 10 years, with huge resources, that's all they have. The Navy is having to leave Sevastopol. Half of it's underwater, the Black Sea Fleet. The Russian Air Force is terrified of flying over Ukrainian airspace, so they launch missiles from outside of Ukraine. The Army has suffered over 500,000 dead and wounded, thousands of vehicles. So I think actually Russia is in a lot more trouble than what we see on the surface. Their economy having a lot of trouble. They have to get ammunition from North Korea and drones from Iran. So yes, the loss of Avdijivka, terrible, thousands of casualties. The counteroffensive did not go like we hoped last year. But if you put it in context, Avdijivka is here. Look where it is in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So I'm reluctant to say that Russia now all of a sudden has momentum. I don't think they have the ability to exploit. I don't think it's there. Mm-hmm. So this year, the new commander, General Syrskyi, his task is to stabilize this front. Don't give up big successes by the Russians, but buy time so that Ukraine can rebuild.
So, as you say, Ukraine is getting on defensive footing for this year, and what needs to be done so that Russia is defeated? Basically, is it still a realistic scenario?
It is realistic if the United States and Germany would say it's in our interest that Ukraine wins. And right now, and I'm proud of what my country has done, the support we've given to Ukraine, what my president has done, but they have stopped short of saying we want Ukraine to win. If they would say that, then there'd be no question about support. But he hadn't done that. And he says, we're with Ukraine for as long as it takes. That's not an objective. The job of the president is to clearly identify the objective. And the German Bundeskanzler has to do the same thing. So this year, I think 2024 is going to be a year of industrial competition. Industrial competition. In other words, Ukraine they have to fix their personnel system. They have plenty of people, but they're not getting them into the military. So they've got to fix that. They have to get ammunition stocks back up. They have to get more weapons, drones, all of these things, industrial competition. You have some European companies are starting to put factories inside Ukraine, and of course all of us in the West are looking for more ammunition. Meanwhile, the Russians are trying to rebuild their defense industry, and you saw Iran just announced they're providing 100 ballistic missiles. So that's the industrial competition I'm talking about.
Speaking about American support, you described this as the aid is in question. How effectively there was a halt in American support. It's not flowing at this moment. General Hodges, in your assessment, what is the real reason behind that?
Well, of course, this is American domestic politics. That's what it's about. The Republican Party even though the majority of Republicans actually support Ukraine, including Republicans in the Congress support Ukraine, there's a small group that that basically follows whatever Mr. Trump tells them. So even a guy like Senator Graham, a longtime supporter of Ukraine, an opponent or critic of Russia, why would he back out now? So this is all about U.S. domestic politics, unfortunately. But President Biden has to make the case. He has to explain to Americans why this is, for us, this is not charity for Ukraine. This is important for us because stability and security in Europe is necessary for European prosperity. And American prosperity is tied directly to European prosperity. So for our own economic interests, this is important that Ukraine wins. And then, of course, if Ukraine is defeated, Russia continues on in the next 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, and attacks a NATO country, now you're going to have American soldiers actually in another war in Europe. So, of course, we should be supporting Ukraine to be successful. And then finally, the Chinese are watching all of this. The Chinese are waiting to see, do we have the political will, the economic and industrial capacity and the military capability to help Ukraine defeat Russia? If we don't, then I think the Chinese, the risk of them doing something goes up. So why has the aid stopped? Some Republicans see advantage on trying to make this about something else. And I can't understand why the Republican Party is not 100% against Russia as they were in the days of Reagan. I don't understand that. But also the president has to make the case.
You mentioned Donald Trump. Is he fundamentally opposed to help Ukraine and maybe even to abandon NATO, or do you think he's playing some tactical games here?
I think that this is more, it's a combination of his vanity. I think he's still angry at President Zelensky for not helping him 4 years ago when he said, you know, I need some, he was looking for dirt on the Bidens. I think he personally still resents that. I think also, I can't explain it, but there's a connection with Russia somehow that, or at least a lot of people believe there's some sort of connection or influence that Russia has. You know, we just saw on a House of Representatives had an investigation into the president's son, and they said we have irrefutable evidence. Well, it turns out that the key witness said, actually, I was lying, and I was getting most of my information from Russian agents. So this is something that eventually will come out. But I don't understand the fact that there seems to be an awful lot of influence from Russia or a willingness to tolerate things from Russia that I'd never expected from an American president.
You also mentioned German support, European support. So what's happening now? Germany, France, Britain, they all signed 10 years agreement. Today Denmark announced they would also sign a similar agreement with Ukraine for long-term support. Is it moving in the right direction? Is the pace enough of how Europeans support Ukraine?
Well, of course, no, it's not fast enough. It should have happened sooner. But the good news is it's happening. And I think our European allies are realizing that whether or not the U.S. is there, the threat from Russia is going to be there. And so European countries know that they have to support Ukraine to make sure that Ukraine does not get overrun by Russia. Again, this is for security and stability in Europe. And, you know, if European countries work together, the combined economic potential of the EU, for example, it dwarfs whatever Russia could do. I mean, significantly, but they have to work together. So this is about political will, not a lack of industrial capacity.
Right. Well, looking for back into those 2 years of war, there is general understanding that the West response, American response, and German response was limited due to the fear of some nuclear escalation. Do you think it was a driving factor, and how relevant is that now?
So it does seem like we were deterring ourselves, that there was a concern of if Ukraine had total success and was able to liberate Crimea, for example, to kick Russia out all the way back to the 1991 borders. I think there was concern in Washington and maybe Berlin and some other places that Russia would use a nuclear weapon, or that the regime would collapse and that they didn't know how to handle that, what to do with it. I think these were terrible mistakes, judgment mistakes. I think it's very, very unlikely that Russia would use a nuclear weapon. There's no place, it wouldn't help them. There's no upside for Russia to use a nuclear weapon. For them, the nuclear weapons are most effective if they don't use them, because they see that oh my God, they might use a nuclear weapon. And so we have deterred ourselves. We don't give Ukraine what they really need, like long-range precision weapons, for example. Germany doesn't provide Taurus because they are very worried about getting directly into combat with Russia, especially if there's a Trump administration. The Germans would be concerned that they would not have a nuclear protection by the U.S. So the fear of Russia using a nuclear weapon, I think, has caused us to stop short of doing what needs to be done, which is to say, we want Ukraine to win. I think people are anxious that if this all fell, that Putin would be removed by his own people. Okay, I don't see what's the downside of that. When the Soviet Union came apart a little over 30 years ago, nobody lost control of nuclear weapons. I think we should not be scared of success.
Right. You mentioned briefly also about the need for more soldiers for Ukraine, and now the expanding draft is obviously sensitive and controversial issue. The Ukrainian parliament is debating that. Does Ukraine need to reform the system immediately?
They have to. What they're doing now is not sustainable. With the casualties, wear and tear on people, fatigue, you can't keep the same people fighting year after year after year. Ukraine needs the ability to pull a unit out of the fight, give it a couple of months to what we call reconstitute. You replace the losses, you replace the equipment, they train, prepare, rest, and then they go back in the fight. But they don't have enough depth to be able to pull anybody out right now. So they're going to have more troops to be able to do that. But population is not the problem. There's probably 2 million Ukrainian women and men that are military age that they could draw on. But they have not made the important political decisions about lowering the age. And I think the thousands of Ukrainians that live in Germany, Poland, Romania, here in the Baltics, they don't trust the system. And so the government, not the general staff, the government has to say, we need you to join the army, but you're going to be properly trained, you're going to get properly equipped, we're going to put you in a unit that's ready to go when you're ready, and we'll take care of your family. They have to do that. And if they did, then I think they would have plenty of people would say, I'm ready to join. They have to fix that. And I hope this year that the government finally does what they need to do. Plus, this undermines support. Countries will start saying, wait a minute, you're begging us to provide resources to you, but your own people are not willing to fight. So I think there's a danger that support for Ukraine could begin to erode because of that also.
In this war, we see several things. First of all, we see a trench warfare that is reminiscent for World War I, but it's also a very high-tech drone war that's happening. What impact will the lessons of this war will have on warfare, future warfare?
It's a great question. We know from Clausewitz that the nature of war is unchanging. It's violence, it's friction, it's uncertainty, it's fear. This is the nature of war. The character of war, what it looks like, obviously is changing. Here in the Black Sea, Ukraine has changed the character of naval warfare. They don't even have a navy, not in a traditional sense, yet they have sunk or destroyed almost half of the Black Sea fleet. The Russian base here in Sevastopol, the Ukrainians were able to destroy the maintenance and destroy the headquarters, and so it's obvious that this place is very vulnerable, and so they're having to move to Novorossiysk. And they've reopened the shipping lanes for grain, and they did that with drones, with special forces, sabotage, and three Storm Shadows. That's incredible. That's completely different. And of course, Lithuanian Navy is paying close attention to that, because the same thing will be true up in the Baltic Sea. Different. Drones, of course, everybody wants drones now, and they're clearly important. They allow you to see. So it will be very difficult to conceal formations from being detected or from being hit. There's no doubt. But drones are not the answer. They're part of it, and the side which is able to use them the best, and also the side which is able to counter it. I mean, for the history of warfare, somebody does this, the other side does that. And so I think our industries are working on ways to counter the effectiveness of drones. But you still need armored vehicles. You still have to move, and I watched a lot of video like you about of tanks being destroyed, all right? Every one of those videos where a tank was destroyed, it's sitting out in the middle of an open field or on a road, unprotected, unconcealed, not properly employed. So that tells me that this is all, you still have to have quality men and women in your formation. You still need soldiers, good sergeants that make people do the right things, and that can learn and adapt. So yes, technology is changing the character, but certain things don't change, and that's the human component.
General, I would like to move closer to our region. Russia has unveiled plans to expand their forces in the western direction, including the creation of new unit 44th Army Corps. So we'll have hundreds of thousands of troops in close to our borders. If this reform is implemented, and first of all, do you believe it will be implemented? But if it's implemented, does it increase threats to us? And how should NATO respond to those military reforms on Russian side?
So, yes, I would say this is possible, especially if Ukraine is unsuccessful and they're defeated by the Russian side. Then the Russians will begin to prepare to attack NATO. I mean, they say it, so I take it at face value, literally. That's what they'll be preparing to do. Now, to be able to do this is going to take some time. I could be wrong, of course, but Ukraine is not going to collapse this year, and most of Russia's military is tied up in Ukraine. But let's say, just hypothetical, a year from now, Ukraine said, okay, we're done. There was a negotiated settlement somehow, and Russia could turn its attention elsewhere and begin to rebuild. I think it would take 3 or 4 years to achieve something like this, getting the bodies, the equipment, the vehicles, the logistics, all the stuff that would be required. And then what do they do depends on what we do. If we look unprepared, that we're not a cohesive alliance, that we're not ready, then, and if we haven't rebuilt our own ammunition stocks, for example, then I think we look vulnerable. And so the risk of them actually doing something becomes real. But, you know, a big red blob on a map, or with a name like 6th Army or 44th Army Corps or whatever, that doesn't equal combat power. When I start seeing real capability, then I will be concerned. In the meanwhile, Lithuania has to work with their allies to make sure that these guys say, no way. I mean, this is what deterrence is all about. And the men and women of Lithuanian armed forces, very good. You're going to have a very large German brigade in Lithuania. You've got Americans that are here now. You've got a huge Polish presence with several thousands of Americans down here. And now Finland is a part of the alliance. I mean, and Sweden, hopefully within the next month or two, this will finally be done. So now the whole Baltic Sea is controlled by NATO. So we have a huge advantage in the Baltic Sea. And if the allies here work together, then I think we'll be able to deter Russia from making a terrible mistake. But three things, if I may offer as a visitor in Lithuania, that Lithuania has to do. Number one, defense is not just military. Defense requires a whole of government approach, the population. And I think our elected officials have to explain to Lithuanians, say, look, there is a risk that Russia will attack. There's a risk. And in the Washington Treaty, which created NATO 75 years ago, Article 3 comes before Article 5. Everybody knows Article 5, armed attack on one shall be considered an armed attack on all. Article 3 says you are responsible for your own defense and helping others. So that means Lithuania has to do its part. And yes, Lithuania, of course, has always been one of the top in terms of investment. But the amount of investment, that's not the goal. I mean, you can't stand on the border of Lithuania with a sign that says, hey, we're 3%. That will not stop a single Russian missile. It's having real capability. So the government has to explain to Lithuanians that we may be 2 weeks alone. I mean, Article 5 is not automatic. It's not people will not just appear out of nowhere. So there could be, in worst case, for 2 weeks before allies show up, it's what's here is what we'll have to fight. Are the people that live in Vilnius or Kaunas or Klaipėda, are they prepared for that? So I think the government has to explain the risk and explain what needs to be done. You know, Finland offers a good model for strong civil defense. I don't know when's the last time there was a large-scale civil defense exercise here in Vilnius. It's probably been a while. You have to practice that. The second thing that I think needs to be done, of course, is the regular armed forces of Lithuania, probably 21,000, something like that, maybe 25,000. High quality, very good. Obviously, that's not enough. So if there's a crisis, you're going to have to expand quickly. So having reserve forces that are trained, ready, they know where to go, they're on a roster, and there's equipment for them, I think is extremely important. And this is something, again, where the government, not the chief of defense, but the government needs to say that we're going to practice this. Here's additional resources so that you can call out the reserves once a year, twice a year. Every single person that's in the reserve should know where he or she is supposed to go. I'm not sure that we're there right now. I would recommend that. And then the third thing is, of course, how are we doing with our Polish neighbors and our Latvian neighbors? These are not little islands.
Right.
They have to, the defenses have to be integrated with each other. And you have to practice that.
General Hodges, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. Ačiū ir mūsų žiūrovams, dėkoju, kad nesate abejingi. Iki pasimatymo kitose laidose.